All right, we're recording. We've got a few things on the agenda today. But first off, I want to hand it off to Mike. I think you've got a question about route status.
Sure. So this is mostly a conversation that I'll be turning over to Nick, I believe. But I've heard anecdotally a few mentions of a proposal to change something about the way that route status is handled, specifically in relationship to like how the gateway is where a lot of that status is reflected. But yeah, I guess Nick or Rob or anybody else who has more context to this, I would be very interested in hearing it.
Hi, sorry. Sorry, I missed that. My wife came back in. Sorry, man.
Sorry, yeah, I'll repeat that. Yeah, so basically I've heard anecdotally a few mentions of proposals to changes of how route status is handled, specifically in relation to how it's like reflected on the gateway and how the gateway can kind of conveys a lot of information about each individual route. I would love to hear more thoughts or detail from anybody who has been part of these conversations about like what the shape of some of those concerns are, and like if there is a proposal in the works, if that's something that may or may not block beta, or if that's something that could be handled in like experimental channel afterwards.
So my understanding, so we have talked a little bit that basically a while ago James did the work to define the status flow for gateway. Sort of went through all of the different permutations and made the conditions and stuff like that for gateway. It's just, I think it's more just that no one has ever sat down and gone through the full flow for HTTP route, made sure we haven't missed any conditions. I think that the model we have is mostly correct. Right, Rob? Correct me if I'm wrong. But I think the model we have is mostly correct, but we may just need I think we need to define like some extra condition types and some extra reasons and stuff like that to sort of tidy up and to be more specific about on route status about what happens when certain things happen, like when you raise certain condition types and things like that. I know the Contour team, when we've been implementing stuff, have found a couple of gaps. And then I think that we'll need to do a similar thing for once we, as part of the route inclusion. I put my hand up for that, but I haven't got to it yet.
Yeah, I think that matches my experience, my understanding too. I don't think we have any pending changes to status that are what I would consider breaking. Those are the things I'd be most concerned about. The things that I think about when I think about status are just gaps. Things lacking conditions, lacking reasons, lacking a common way of handling certain error conditions. Like I think there are some cases in GKE right now where our implementation has created custom conditions or event types or other things to communicate an error state that maybe we're the only ones that have, or maybe there's just other unique handling out there. I think the structure itself is fine, but there's a lot of room for more conditions and types that are commonly used. That's my understanding. Route delegation definitely brings another element here of instead of right now our route gateway binding is, so our status in routes right now is very tied to the parent resource, and a route having a parent that is another route makes that a little funny and weird. And
That's exactly what got me thinking about this. But like, how should that be handled? Is the way that we're handling it currently okay, or is that a kind of motivation to rethink parts of this or not?
I had a little look at it as well just before I offered to do the rewrite on that other doc, and I think what we got is actually pretty close. The fact that we've referred to it as parent ref the whole time rather than gateway ref or anything like that, like I think it may just mostly work, but we just may need to sort of be more specific about these things mean that the whole route must be rejected, and these things mean that the attachment to the parent route is rejected, and we need to tell you that the attachment to the parent route was rejected for some reason. And that's but the other important thing is that that we've got the controller, the owning controller thing there as well, so that you can know which controller has picked that up in the case that you have multiple running in the cluster. So yeah, I think I will sit down and have a think about that, but I feel pretty good that we shouldn't need any changes any breaking API changes. It should just be like being more specific about the flow and how the flow works and what the stages are. I would encourage anyone who has implemented this already to there's like an implementer's experience discussion that someone opened a while ago. Rob, I will ask the Contour, Steve Chris, the Contour, who's doing the Contour implementation, to just go through and find any bits where I know he's found a couple of places where we've ended up doing our own conditions. I'll just ask him to comment them there so that we can try and collect all of the feedback in one place. If you could do that as well, that would be good. That'll make it, yeah. And I would encourage anyone else who's doing implementations who's needed to do route status conditions or custom types or reasons or any of that sort of stuff, then yeah, if you could work on that thing, I'll in a minute I'll find that discussion and put it in under here.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've been meaning to do some kind of internal audit just to understand, what conditions we have accumulated at this point, what we're publishing, and which of those seem like they could potentially be generic and upstreamed. Yeah, good idea. And like you said, any implementation in progress, input very, very welcome at this point. There's something about implementing an API where you run into more edge cases than you think about when you're actually designing the API. So yeah.
Absolutely.
So one tiny thing, I think, well, before I move on, Mike, was there anything else to cover on status?
No, I think that's mostly it. Of just like trying to figure out if there's any like large change floating around that's been discussed but hasn't made it into a proposal. It sounds like not really. It's kind of just like ironing out some of the details and figuring out how we might want this to apply to the route inclusion delegation stuff. It sounds good. Thanks.
Cool. Great. Yeah, just one quick note on KubeCon. We did get our session in. It is maintainer track. Hopefully, conditions are such that we're able to make it there. We'll see, but either way, we are presenting, open to ideas on if there's specific bits of content we should highlight or talk about in that session. And certainly if others are able to make it to KubeCon, it would be great to see people there again, if conditions allow. Yeah, I don't know, Nick, did you have anything to add? Just cool.
Yes, and no, I don't. I was just making sure I put that discussion in while I thought of it. Yeah, no, I think Rob, you and I are both planning to be there, right? So yeah, so we're gonna run the session in person. The usual format for these things is pretty prescribed these days. Like you need to do an intro to the project, you do a demo or some sort of, sort of here's what the project actually does, and then you talk about where the project is going on the roadmap. So that's what we'll need to talk about.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so, yeah. If anyone is actually going to be in KubeCon EU, I'd be, aside from crazy people like Rob and I, like I'm not sure if anyone is actually going to travel to Europe, and this is not the right time zone generally for European people to dial in. So I'm hoping to see some people who are doing implementations in Europe. Yeah, but yeah, sure. I would certainly love to see anyone who is on this call or who is watching this recording in person at KubeCon EU.
Cool. Next up, well, actually, Nick, yours seems very well. No, I'll go through what. Let's go to yours first, Nick. You okay. Have a few little install things.
Yeah. One thing I did realize I did notice that we have been we moved straight on to business, but we didn't really we haven't been doing. I don't think we've been doing a great job, Rob, of introing the meeting for the recordings and stuff. So yeah, let's let's take a moment now and sorry everyone, this is the Gateway API meeting. Rob, Scott, and Nick Young, me are we're maintainers, and we tend to drive the meetings a lot. If it's your first meeting, please feel free to unmute or put your hand up or something and say hi if there's any questions. We have an agenda. The agenda is just there to make sure that we don't forget things. Please feel free to add anything you want to add at any time. Or if you have a question or would like to discuss something, then you can feel free to do that too. I did notice there's a couple of extra new people who I haven't seen before. If you're doing an implementation or something like that, then we'd love to hear more about it. And so 100% fine if you don't feel like talking about it today, but welcome to everybody. Okay. So I just wanted to quickly run some install things past so that people had a chance to check violently before I go away and do the work to actually implement these things. I'm working on making it so that installing the webhook is a little easier, and that a YAML for installing the webhook will be included as part of our release bundle. So there's a bunch of stuff I needed to figure out. This is the sort of the headline things. There's a bunch of other little fiddly details, but I wanted to run these. So right now that stuff gets installed in a namespace called Gateway API. This feels a little, I feel like renaming to Gateway System would probably be more reflective of the fact that this is like a system level thing if you're using the Gateway API, and keep up with the sort of dash system nomenclature that lots of other parts of the project use. So that I'm proposing to do that. Does anyone care aside from me?
I would just vote that, thumbs up to that. For anyone who does work on gateway APIs. It's or API gateways, I'm sorry. It's a nice discriminator, so thumbs up.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's a reasonable change. I think the install base of Gateway API, like of these manifests, is probably pretty minimal. But we'll just need to make sure we have a good release note in there in case they end up with 2 webhooks at some point in their future.
That would suck. Yes. And then in terms of actually doing the install, the next thing is right now we recommend people do a KitKat or customize with the tag. What I'd like to do is look at if there's a way to set up a rendered, we have a copy of the rendered stuff in the branch, in the branch, and possibly have I'm thinking maybe having like a single rendered file with everything in it, like, that's the easy install, and then having those rendered files live in a directory somewhere that has individual files, so that if you want to customize them or something like that, it's much easier than needing to do something. To parse a single big chunk of YAML really sucks. I had to do that previously for installing other things, and it's much nicer to have a set of YAMLs. I'm a little reluctant to go too far down like a Helm chart or something like this for this setup, because almost certainly everyone who's going to be installing an implementation is going to have to do something like a Helm chart or some other thing, and this is going to be a dependency. I would much rather make it that your implementations can include these YAMLs in their Helm chart somehow, rather than be too complicated about dependency management. So those are my feelings. Again, wanted to give everyone a chance to sort of tell me I'm wrong before I got too far down the path of doing this.
Yeah, I can jump in. I am all on board of less generation. Certainly, I've heard Helm and CRDs don't play well, for example. Customize is not terrible. It can be a simple. I think we make it overcomplicated in our install instructions, where now it's just kubectl apply -k, and it just kind of works. But less custom, like just as whatever we do, if it can be as simple as possible, that would be my, like you said, like to make it as easy as possible to include elsewhere. I don't care too much about the underlying bits. But yeah,
So-
strong preference for simple.
Yeah. So the other reason I want it to be simple relates to the next item, which is that I want to add a conformance test suite for the webhook validation. So that my idea here is we need to ensure that implementations as part of their standard install are including the webhook. So we need to ensure that we're testing that the stuff that we are validating in the webhook fails when it should fail, basically. So that's what the conformance test suite for the webhook validation will be, that there'll be a bunch of stuff that the webhook should block. And the conformance test suite will check that it does block them. And in order to do that, we're going to need to be able to make it easy for implementers to install the webhook. And ideally, it needs to be able to be done in CI, right? So that you can do a single line thing that will install the webhook, and you can wait till the webhook comes up, and then you can run the conformance test. So I want to make sure that before that, as part of very soon, around in the same release, that we add, that we change the way the install works, or that I add the conformance test suite that we've changed the way the install works, so that it's much easier to do that sort of thing. That's all. I had great, thanks. I had a look through, Rob. I've got a much more detailed proposal there, but I'll write that up in an issue. We don't need to waste time with that here.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's actually
really... you roll into the V1 beta one. I've got one other thing that I need to add while you do that. Okay,
well, that was actually a really good transition, because one of these things I added to the milestone was E2E test for the validating webhook, which seems like it overlaps with your last bullet point. I've done some very basic exploration, but I think at a high level, we need to deploy the webhook, run through our examples and invalid examples, and ensure that it can prevent bad things from getting through and let all good things get through, basically at a very high level, and make that an E2E pre-submit that runs on every PR. We already have something very similar to that with our kind cluster that we spin up and run some basic things with. That's just testing CRD validation. It seems like it makes sense just to expand that to include webhook validation. So yeah, that is one of many things we have going on here.
The thing that I wanted to add to that was just that I think that we should make sure that I'm going to try and hit every bit of validation we do currently in the webhook and make sure that there's a test for it. And then if we ever add more validation to the webhook, you add the unit tests, but then you also need to add the conformance test, so that way that we can make sure that everybody's stuff is keeping up to date. And as we release, that's it all just lines up and make sure that everybody's doing the right thing. The other thing that I wanted to make sure is available for people here is that if you want to take the webhook implementation code and superclass it and do your own validation as well, the thing that will be required for conformance is whatever is in the upstream. So if you want to take whatever's in the upstream and do a bit extra validation, you can, but you can't take away validation and still be conformant. Part of the point of the conformance testing the validation is that the validations we have put into the webhook are required to be gateway API compliant or conformant.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction. We don't need to validate how the webhook is deployed. We just need to validate that all the validations we expect are present. And I know on GKE, we're planning to deploy the webhook in some kind of managed way, but it will be the open source code doing the validation. Just one less thing to worry about. Yeah. Okay, so we're getting awfully close, as the theme of these meetings has been to a V1 beta 1 release, v0.5.0 of the API. And I went through, we had this V1 beta 1 milestone for a while, and I went through and added a bunch of issues to it that I think are relevant to V1 beta 1. Some of these are long-lived issues that just need to be resolved before we hit V1 beta 1. Some of these are brand new that came out of our discussion in one of the last couple meetings. At the very top of the list, you can probably tell that we have a long-lived issue. One that has been neglected, but something like that would be worth reviving discussion on again. In our initial SIG network review for V1 Alpha 2, we got some feedback that port range or all ports was a useful use case of the API. We currently don't provide that functionality. I think the people that are most interested in this functionality are not on this call, so it may not be the best means of discussing it here, but if anyone is interested in this functionality, definitely let us know.
Rob, I'd like to chime in and say yes, definitely interested. I can give you a use case if you're interested.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, we are a firewall, so firewalls, L7 firewalls don't really care about ports. I mean, it's more inspecting all traffic. So ports are useful for proxy type applications like HTTP. But if I want to send a customer to send us all their traffic to say inspect it, we don't want to have to go and tell them, oh, list all the ports you want inspected. It's like, no, they want to say inspect all this. And it's like the IDS we have launching Google today. Just now it's they don't care. They don't want to look at ports. They care about ports. They don't want to have to go and specifically express all the ports they want to look at. They may want to exclude things, or they may want to do some manipulation of it. But the general case is give me all the traffic and then let me then decide what to do about it. Does that make sense?
Well, that's a good use case. That sounds like it's not just all ports, it's all ports and all protocols. Is that?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Good to know. That does seem like it is different than kind of the primary use case we've been building a lot of the API around, but it doesn't mean that the API can't, eventually support that. It's just that the biggest concern I have with this potential change to the API is what it means for the primary use case of the API, right? I shouldn't say the primary use case, but the first set of implementations of this API are very focused on ingress, for lack of a better term, ingress traffic. And in many cases, matching all ports or a range of ports can be more complicated or just not scale well in those scenarios. So I think the question of all ports maybe is not so much if it could be useful, but how we could do it in a non-breaking way if we wanted to add it in the future or now. Because right now it would be a very much breaking change.
Would it be attached to like TCP or UDP rather than attached to HTTP routes? I mean, for HTTP routes, obviously ports makes a lot of sense. But if I'm using TCP or UDP routes, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Or from my point of view, not necessarily from others, but
I think, sorry, someone else goes.
Oh, I had one comment question here. Do we have a table with implementations and for each proposed feature, if that particular behavior is supported by a majority or a subset of the implementers? Because I can see, in some implementation, it will be very easy to add. In some implementation, it will not be. And for users, it's probably important to know that feature, particular core feature is, is implemented by everyone.
Yeah, so I think that it's certainly the way that we've designed the API is that we've got the idea of the support levels at a per field basis. Right? So some fields are core support that we expect all implementations that implement that object to support. So other fields are extended ones that we don't, that you are optional support, and some fields are implementation specific that, or some values for some fields may be implementation specific. I would say like the for this specific thing that we're talking about with all ports, where we have to put the constructs is on the listeners. So you can't, having these port ranges available will affect every type of route, no matter what type of route you're actually doing in your implementation, because it has to go at the gateway, and everybody has to do some form of gateway. That's gateway API. It's called the gateway API because the gateway is kind of the core resource around everything else spins. And so I'm getting to answer your question, Costin. So yeah, I think we could absolutely. So when we do the stuff to add all ports, this stuff has been done before in Kubernetes. This is like pluralizing a field effectively. There's a whole bunch of API guidelines around this. And it can be quite complicated to pluralize a field like port into ports, and then have some special case handling for all ports, and have that be backwards compatible if you already have a singular port idea. So adding something like this probably is a breaking change, and that's why we need to at least have thought about it now. So even just adding a place to put this information is a breaking change. It can be a breaking change if you're not super careful. If we were to proceed right now to beta with a singular port, and then we wanted to add something that would allow you to do a port range, say a list of ports, and some mechanics in that list to be able to let you describe like port range instead of just having to list out all the individual ports, then that doing that means that there's a set of rules you've got to do about, well, if you only set the single port one, then that should be auto translated by your implementation to also mean a set of ports with one entry. And if you set a set of ports with one entry, then it should be translated back so that it's backward compatible. But that's only after you've done the stuff to move to beta, where there's a no API breaking changes guaranteed. So if we wanted to just add ports now, then it'll suck right now, but it'll be much easier in the long run. And that's one of the reasons that Rob has raised this, is to talk about it. In terms of actual use of this, Costin, I think that it seems likely to me that what John is saying is 100% correct, that people who are going to do TCP route and UDP route, like for UDP routing use cases, it is extremely common that you'll need to do a range of ports. SIP, RTP, lots and lots of UDP protocols require you to forward or may otherwise make available a range of ports. I think that asking people to have implemented this when we haven't defined it properly is sort of putting the cart before the horse a little bit. Is that what you were asking, or were you asking something?
Something I don't know. Just was trying to figure out because the API should abstract what the implementations are doing and what is commonly supported. So I don't mind a range of ports or a list of ports, but I want to make sure that for every feature that we add to the API, we confirm first that the implementations that exist will support it or are planning to support it or have capability to support it, because it's one thing to listen on a port and many servers do that. Yeah, it's completely different to listen to multiple ports or to a range or to in terms of implementation.
Yeah, I totally get that, but I think that's the other thing that you've got to remember is that we are kind of defining the point of this API is to define what implementations can support as well, right? So it's not just we're going to take what implementations are going to support. We're also about defining what you can support. And so like we do need to be able to think a little bit ahead and make sure that we're not painting ourselves into a corner, which is where a lot of the things that we're doing are coming from other experiences in other parts of the Kubernetes APIs, where people have not sort of made allowances for this sort of stuff, and have ended up having to do like big, long phased rollouts and stuff that are very painful. And Rob is smiling because he's had to do this for a couple of things now, personally. So yeah, I'll hand it over to Rob to talk for a second.
Hey Nick, just a quick question, maybe a dumb question. Yeah. So ports today are a mandatory field. So if I don't put a port in, what happens?
Your thing will be rejected.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a
good change. Very possible.
It's a very good question. I think we've had this discussion come off and on for a while now. The last time I think it came in full force was as part of our SIG network API review when we were going to V1 Alpha 2. And part of that was, hey, we really need to have an answer for this as we get to beta. The high level themes that I remember from previous discussions and this one is that it is a desired use case for at least some implementations. It is difficult to do in a non-breaking way. And it is something that a chunk of implementations, a non-trivial chunk, just cannot support. So we have a few conflicting things here. And this also somewhat goes up against the, as Nick had mentioned, we have this idea of field level stability. So we have, okay, this is something like a support channel of core. So everyone is going to support this feature, this field, whatever. But at the same time, we have extended, and that's usually what we bucket these into. Where this is a little bit more complicated is that this is such a core concept. This is the port I'm listening to. So you can't just say, well, port is extended. You need some very clear definition of what is core functionality that we want everyone to support, while also leaving some room. It's not saying we need to add this to the API tomorrow. It's just saying we need to graduate to beta, we need to have a plan for how we could add it to the API. And I think that's really the work that's required here. Some kind of plan. Ideally, that plan is, hey, we found this way that doesn't require breaking changes. Maybe it's learning from upstream where they just kind of add a second field that's extended, and that's your upper limit, and that's, this is your port, and it can either be a starting point of a range, or it's just the port you listen on. And if the end of that range is defined, you have a port range of, and just ideas, right? So maybe there's a way where we can do this without.
So Rob, I think this directly relates to how the networking is done. That if you're doing a proxy of listening on ports and sockets, that's one way of doing networking. We typically don't do that. We just listen. We don't listen. We take all the traffic through various CNI magic, as I think Nick mentioned a couple of meetings ago. So it's a very different way of, I understand it's a very different way of looking at it, but I'm quite prepared if you're say this is not going to be a part of the use cases. Yeah, I can write something up to help the discussion, but I think
go ahead, sorry, finish.
Go ahead. I'm going to finish.
Austin was up next.
Sorry, I just want to say, yes, I agree. I mean, we also intercept and we could implement it, but there are some implementations where it's simply impossible because they are not, maybe external gateways, maybe they're running in a managed infrastructure. And, so that's why it's difficult to make it as a core feature. It's perfectly fine to have it as an extension. And I thought that the current mechanism for extension, I mean, we could attach a policy to the listener to say that, hey, this listener intercepts everything, or it's capturing a range or other things.
I think.
I don't know. Go ahead.
Yes, I was going to say, I think that, as Rob says, in this case, it's not really very good for policy because it's such a core part of the API. Like this one, we can't really use the policy mechanisms and stuff because it's such a core. So right now, Jeff, I have seen your hand, and I'll get you just a sec. Right now, the way you define a gateway is that a gateway takes all the listeners, which are a set of ports and protocols. That's what a listener is. And attaches them to and binds them to all the addresses that it's supposed to listen on, and that's what a gateway is. That's what the object describes literally. And so, if we're going to allow multiple ports, then that is a significant change to the thing. And I like to be clear, I think we should allow multiple ports. I think we should have a mechanism to describe this. Exactly how it works is going to be really dependent. It is going to be we need to write it down very clearly, and we need to write down very clearly what happens if you can't support multiple ports. I don't think it's complicated. I think that you can say, if your implementation doesn't support multiple ports and someone tries to define it, that just means that your gateway is not admitted. Like, that's pretty straightforward. And so, yeah, That's what I think we should do here, and to say the big change that we have to do is that then, in order to be able to support multiple ports, the current required port field needs to become optional, which is a tricky change to make in a non-breaking way. And so that one is the one that we might need to do before we go to beta. Okay, so Jeff, over to you. Sorry.
Actually, I was just going to say basically what you just said there at the end is that having ports as optional might be a good way to deal with that. We've got for our use case as well. There's areas where we don't define a port. So what we've had to do is we'll just ignore whatever it's set to. But I think it would be better if just officially we made that field an optional. So depending on the use case, it would be used or not.
That's a really interesting. So it's good to hear that others are considering port optional a good use case. It would be very helpful. This is issue 818. John and Jeff, if you're able to, and anyone else who's interested, if you're able to add comments, just explaining your use cases on here. I think really what we need out of this is, again, not necessarily to make the API change, but either to have a clear path forward where this is not a breaking API change, or if it is, to make it before we get to beta. And so we need to figure that out as soon as possible. So getting these additional use cases, it's interesting. I'm really interested in your use case, Jeff, of just an optional or empty port, because it sounds like, does that mean you're just listening on all ports in that case as well? Or is it a bit different for you?
Sometimes we're getting the port assigned to us.
Okay, got it.
So we're just asking for an available port.
That makes sense.
So you still end up having the assigned port in the status, so that it uses the same mechanism as we do for addresses, where if you don't specifically request an address, the expectation is that an address will be assigned for you, and you take whatever's in the status, and that's your address. But you take that same mechanism and use it for port. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So Costin just made a comment, that mesh use case, and he's right. That's where we just in certain use cases we just register. We're registered as a service, and so to access, you look up in the registry what the address for that port.
Yep. Okay.
Or excuse me, the port for that gateway service.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So yeah, I think that feels like a pretty logical extension of what we're talking about, and would extend well. So maybe the answer here is the thing we need to do to address the port range and all ports use cases is to make current port optional. While we're at it, maybe we should just think about what would a ports field look like. There are upstream examples already in service for one, and so maybe we should just lift whatever service is doing, so that's the same at least. But yeah, so I think that is definitely a pretty clear thing that we could do. That I can't remember. I needed to look up the API changes doc. I think that making a required field optional is not actually a breaking API change.
Yeah, that's been our practice so far. It's usually something that's rolled out very gradually and cautiously, but we're going from alpha to beta. We can likely do that in one rev.
So yeah. I think in the case of Costin, I think the what we're talking about here is not services in the traditional sense. This is talking about describing traffic flows that are for a UDP flow or something like that. If you want to run a UDP service inside Kubernetes that does things, then it's quite common that you will need to forward a range of ports like RTP and stuff like that.
Usually it's a very large launch for RTP for WebRTC and all the other stuff. And it's not fixed. I mean, it's usually, it's pretty much all ports can be assigned dynamically. So it's a big difference between dynamic ports and these, 5 ports or even a range of ports. It's, WebRTC, I think it has about 4 or 5 ports that are used.
Yeah, so I mean, I mean, in terms of our API, we only have really, we only really have 3 options: 0 ports, 1 port, or as many, like an arbitrary number of ports. Like in terms of API design, those are really our 3 options. Like I mean, we can put limits if we have like a list in the API. You can put limits on how big the list can be. Probably we would want to do that so people don't put 65,535 list entries in the list. But they won't need to do that if there's some mechanism in the API to describe, start from port 1000 and go to port and go to port 2000.
How do you see it? I mean, having a repeated list of ports is fine, but ranges basically start and end. It's not really, it's a slightly different.
So
way
to be honest, what I have in my head is that you have a list of ports that have, I don't know if they would have a name or something, but they would have a string description of the port that can either be a single, like the string can contain a single integer, the word all, or 2 integers separated by some separator that would describe a range. Like that, off the top of my head, that is what I would do to handle all 3 of the use cases, of those use cases. And then you mandate, these are the formats of the strings, and that's how the API then works. And we have the validation that makes sure that that you have only those characters in there, and that behavior is prescribed by the API to say that if you define if someone writes the ports in this way, then this is what it means. And that's what we've done for the rest of the API for this sort of thing, is that I don't I don't see that we would have the ports be an integer that you specify, like 1,000 integers. No, absolutely not. That would be silly. This would be a string that has specific formatting that can be applied that describe the different types of things.
I think, well, we keep moving, Nick. Just anybody who has comments on this, just add it to the open issue.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's the place to go.
Yeah, I agree.
I will put a straw man of what I just discussed in there so that we have something to talk about.
Perfect. I am happy to follow up with some kind of doc, but it would be a lot easier to write that if whoever's commented here, if they could actually add that comment on the issue. So 818, and then I can follow up with something. And anyone interested in helping with a gap or anything like that, very open to help on this one. Cool. Well, we've got a bunch of other things to do. I think we could discuss this all day, but I think it's good to move on to other items here. So let me move on through the rest of what I've added. And I think everything else in this milestone is less controversial, I hope. So first off, we've got some pre-beta cleanup tasks. This is one, Nick, you created, you're on it. This is just making sure the webhook is actually in a good state. I appreciate that. I think you may have already added it to the milestone. If not, it's in here now. Steve added a suggestion that we should actually validate Pathmatch value in our webhook. I think our validation there is not as good as it could be. So again, just this one I think is relatively straightforward, but will take some time. If anyone is interested in volunteering for this or others, I think this could be a good starting point, a good way to contribute. If you want to add something to the webhook, this would be a valuable one. Now this is issue 960. And I think that's true for most of the rest of these. But again, if you've got some extra cycles and are interested in contributing, would be very, very appreciative of some contributions here. Next, admission webhook.
This is all just stuff that I'm working on to do that. Like this is very small. This is actually a very small change. Just wanted to make it a task to make sure that I actually get it. And same with all the other ones that say admission webhook.
Yeah, there's a few docs ones here.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you a million times. I added some more document, you see all these kind documentation ones. These are all hopefully fairly straightforward. the one we just talked about, E2E testing for validating webhook. I think that's in a good place. And finally, the V1 beta 1 types for resources that are graduating to beta. This is just kind of like that last and final step before we release beta. I'm not in a rush to get to this one, but I think it's the last one.
Part of the milestone.
Yes. So with that, these are the things I'm aware of that we need to get to before V1 beta 1. If anyone thinks of anything else that we need to get to in this milestone, please let me know. I think most of us can add things to the milestone, but if you can't, let any of the maintainers know, and we can. Yeah. With that, any questions on this V1 beta 1 milestone? Cool.
We do have one more agenda item, Rob, that I just added.
Oh, all right.
So
Yes, thank you.
yeah, there has been a vigorous discussion on the route inclusion document about why we. So I think, Costin, this was you had quite a few questions about why we're looking at doing the parent ref option rather than using the existing sort of back end thing. Is that what? Do you think that that's a fair summation of what we've been talking about?
Not entirely. I mean, I think it's important to have the inclusion. I'm just think the current proposal is too broad and too flexible for, considering other implications like security and other.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess the reason I wanted to have it so a high bandwidth discussion is so that we could do this a bit quicker. So in terms of, what do you think would make this, what would you feel more comfortable with? Is it that you would like this to be not a label selector, but to select objects individually?
Initially, at least, I think it would be a good idea, and I think we can extend it later to add. I mean, if we can at any point add what you propose, I mean, to have a broad selector. But if we start with just explicitly select routes, it seems to be safer, and we can get some feedback from the implementations and usage.
Okay. So the reason that I have been a -1 on that is that Contour built a HTTP proxy object that did exactly what you're talking about. It had a parent, like we did it slightly differently. They weren't two separate types of object, but you have a parent HTTP proxy that includes a child one, and you have to name the child one. Like you give it a name and a namespace, and that's the only way that it works. What people found when they were doing that is that because it was so specific, it meant that if you ever wanted to change, if the owner of the child one ever wanted to change their resource or do like a flip between resources or something like that, then they needed to have the owner of the gateway manually like edit their object. And it means that you need to have two people coordinating in real time to actually make a change happen. And people strongly felt that this stopped them from being able to use Contour's HTTP proxy, and that's why I suggested that we have the namespace selector thing available.
But it's not the same thing, because here it's a HTTP route that needs to be modified. So it's basically the gateway, it's listening on a port, and it delegates to a number of HTTP routes, and then each HTTP route may forward a subset to different namespaces. And I agree with you that having two.
Sorry, no, you finish. Sorry.
Sorry, no, I just want to say, I mean, the reason your approach, the original approach, was actually not bad. I mean, it was useful for people who care about security and about having control, because the alternative, that's the problem with the alternative. I mean, it's you take away control from the owner of the gateway who controls the namespace, basically.
Yeah. You go, Jeff.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think from the, I'd echo what Nick said. And to be honest, I originally, Costin was kind of looking at it the way you did when I looked at how allowed routes work, way back when. But I think that what Nick said is really true, and that is that by just being able to point out either a label, such as the namespace, in the delegation use case, I don't have to, I'm telling this group, hey, this is the way, or this is where you plug into me, and you do what you want, so you could, as the one being delegated to, they could create one HTTP route, they could create, a dozen HTTP routes and plug them into the same spot in my parent route. So it just allows the team that would be, or responsible for the child is got great flexibility in how they manage their piece of it.
And also part of the intention is having the operator be able to narrowly define that slot where the child route could attach, basically like as narrow as they choose. Like it could be as wide as an entire namespace on a host name, or it could be something like a very specific path prefix. So there's only like a very small way, and then applying filters and stuff like that too to narrow it. So it's designed to kind of be flexible in that way.
So it is, yeah. So I think, Costin, it feels like the thing that you're saying is you feel like it's too flexible at the moment.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. And I think that is fair. I think the reason that we've all ended up there though is because, so it's a little bit. So the other thing that I think is really important to remember with this is that we have specifically designed this with a two-way handshake. So the gateway's allowed routes is called allowed routes and not any other thing, because all it, as Mike and Jeff referred to, all it does is it makes the spot that the routes can attach to. Right, like, and so it's the route owner's decision as to where they attach to. So it's up to the route owner to do things correctly and to attach to the right things. And so it's up to, and so the reason we've moved towards this sort of thing is that and so it's the same with the parent, right? Like, so the other reason that I wanted to do it with the parent ref is that then that's the same you reuse the same mechanism between gateway and route and route and route. And so having that same mechanism means there's less to learn in the API, and that you're keeping the same sort of descriptors and stuff like that. And it means that the API is just overall more simple. I agree that it means that you've got this sort of complexity at the route to route thing where you can say, where it's very possible to have a very wide open route set. It's very possible to say, allow all namespaces to attach routes to me. But the thing that we're trying to do to manage that risk is to say, you must specify exactly the allowed routes on a route object is nil unless there's no default behavior. If you don't specify an allowed routes, then and another route tries to attach to that route as a parent, it will fail. And so there needs to be a two-way handshake here. There's like with the gateway, we do not have that behavior. If you don't specify anything, then routes in the same namespace are allowed to request to attach. But for route to route one, it specifically says, even if it's in the same namespace, the owner of the parent route has to specifically create an allowed routes thing to do it. And I completely understand what you're saying, that you want to start with the more narrow, specifically allowing things. The reason I'm -1 on that is that my experience has been that very quickly people find that is too limiting. That there's for the delegation case.
Yeah, the opposite experience, on Istio side, for example, is that by making it too flexible, and that's pretty much what we do for mesh routes, we create far more problems and both instability and because if you have people typically attach put service entries and routes in random namespaces, and they affect other namespaces without realizing they're doing it, and it created a lot of problems for us. That's why I'm very, especially everything that crosses namespace, it's a danger, and it's very hard to understand all the implication of it. So it's for gateway in particular, we spend quite a lot of time going over every possible scenario and trying to minimize the breadth, the scope of this mechanism. But if we extend this mechanism to routes where you can have attached policies, you can have all kinds of other complexities, it would be pretty much worse than Istio is today in this aspect.
I think I just reiterate, I think what Mike's mentioned earlier is the fact that you're only delegating to the child route the specific the traffic that meets the specific criteria that you set at the parent. So if I'm the owner of the gateway and I'm the owner of that parent route, and I want to send, delegate some part of the traffic processing rules to space foo, the the
Did we lose you, Jeff?
that I'm sending to them.
I think we lost you for a second, Jeff.
Figures. Basically, I think the owner route restricts what the child route can deal with. They can't mess with other parts of the traffic besides what's sent to them.
I think
How about, can we make it a bit narrow? I mean, not have a label selector, but just specify a list of namespaces, because that at least will reduce a bit. Because label selectors are the problem. I mean, anyone can put a label. It's very difficult to control which labels are with admission controllers, which labels are allowed. That's really the problem to me, is that you put label foo. I mean, except for the ones that you said where it's a list of namespaces, it's explicit. You select a namespace, which is equivalent with what I'm asking for. If you use any other labels, then there is a risk that people are setting labels of namespaces without control and introduce hacks, basically.
I think that labeling namespaces or any kind of right access to namespaces in Kubernetes has to be viewed as a cluster admin type level access. Especially with its implications on network policy now. I think we're really copying in many ways what network policy has relied on here, where, as I understand it, there's some history on that side where, again, a list of namespaces was also a very interesting idea for them instead of a label selector. And instead, I think it was someone who was very involved in network policy came up with this idea of automatically labeling namespaces with the metadata name label. And now that we have that, we can do, basically a list of namespaces, but plus, any other things too. I get that it is scary, that it does allow for, more broad selection than specifically requiring a list. But I think this is more consistent with other Kubernetes APIs and even our own API in how we're doing it from gateway to route. And so that leads me to stick with what's familiar. I think a list of namespace names is maybe not as flexible as we would like. I don't know.
But do we really want this flexibility? I mean, is it this kind of flexibility really required for this, or can we start with something that is not as flexible and figure out the security implications? Because again, we had plenty of bugs and security issues with namespaces, with cross namespace security issues.
So I think there's a couple of things I need to talk about there. So I think the problem is that if we put a list of namespaces, I think if we put a list of namespaces, the problem is that then that's there forever, right? Like, and then if we want to add a selector as well, then the behavior about like how we move from a list of namespaces to a selector later is tricky, and changing this later would then be hard. In this specific case, I think Mike put a comment in the chat that, I think we definitely need to have good guidance on, and say, you should be using Kubernetes IO.metadata name unless you really know what you're doing. And using other labels means that anybody who has permission to label things can mess with this config. That absolutely should be a call out in the documentation for this field. But and I understand what you're saying. I think that the other thing that's relevant here, though, is you are 100% right to be quite concerned about cross namespace references. We have, Rob literally found, 2 CVEs in Kubernetes by us thinking about cross namespace references. We are 100% in agreement that cross namespace references are very risky. The only way that we have been able to come up with to make them better is to say that there must be this two-way handshake between the owner of a resource and whoever refers to it. And so that's where the gateway, the allowed routes plus a parent ref on the child route comes from. And that's also why in this API, we have the reference policy for things where we can't change that, like service, secret, and other Kubernetes objects. We're definitely very cognizant of the security risks of creating cross namespace references, but this is the way that we mitigate those risks, is by saying gateway, this is a two-way street. The gateway or the parent route needs to explicitly allow the cross namespace reference, and then the parent and then the child route needs to create it. Like there's an extent to which we can't protect people from themselves too much, right? Like the capabilities that are described by the Gateway API are required by advanced users who have a lot of knowledge and control over their clusters. They need the flexibility. I have had many people come to me on Contra and be like, I cannot use your thing unless I get this very specific knob to twiddle. I know that you have the same problem on Istio. Like I know that you have made things very flexible on purpose, and that has bitten you. I hear you. This is the best that we have been able to come up with to control cross namespace. Sorry, Jeff.
No, it's fine. I just sensitive we're over time, and I just wanted to make two comments on the route inclusion thing. One is I'm pretty seriously considering changing the conflict resolution to be fail at bind, but I want to get people input on that. So you'll see a comment in there where Nick and I both say Nick says that's what he thinks what we should do, and I'm shifting my thinking, and so I guess I would say if you don't want it to change, then speak up loudly in the doc and comment. The other thing is I'm probably going to try to get this into an actual formal GEP, at least a draft in the draft state, maybe by the end of this coming weekend, something like that, so we can start refining it and nitpick on little details through the comments in GitHub.
Yeah, I think the last thing I want to say there that I think is relevant to what Costin's talking about is, I think one of the concerns I feel like you have, Costin, is like, if we have this, then we've got this really big so we do need to still allow people to do dangerous things, sadly. Like I would love to be able to be like, no, you can't do dangerous things, you can't shoot yourself in the foot. But what I have found, my experience with the Kubernetes API is that sometimes people are like, I really want to be able to shoot myself in the foot, and they'll be really upset at you if you don't allow them the opportunity. Because sometimes being able to point that gun straight at your own foot is important. And we can't do this with an extension because of where it sits. So some of the stuff we can't do with the extensions because of where it sits in the API. We can mark things as extended support. We can say the only thing that's supported in here is metadata name or something like that. We can do that, but like the fields themselves have got to be there.
I'm a bit disagree with this. I mean, there are a lot of things you can do with extensions. It's not really. I mean, if we define an attention point as so again, Istio can support this without any changes to the API, because by saying that, hey, you just use Istio APIs and we keep the behavior we have today. So it's not necessarily that something needs to be expressed in the gateway API in order to be implemented by someone.
I mean, I think we like, as Jeff said, we're over time, and we need to wrap this up. But I think in my mind, the thing that is important is that if we change the conflict resolution, as Jeff says, then one of the things that's important to remember is that it's expected that if anything is weird about this binding, that it fails. And so like your implementations are then free to add extra rules on top and just be like, hey, you tried to attach, sorry, that's not supported. You're like, and you try to do something that your implementation doesn't want to do, you say, sorry, I don't support that. We describe what conditions describe that behavior, and then that's the way that we can make this more extended, like some specific things extended support. Maybe you just make it so that in Istio you're in an implementation like no, and so but the thing is, if a label on a namespace changes dynamically, then it will unattach. Like that's that is it's not this behavior, the binding behavior is not, then that is expected that if something changes on the namespace and the labels change on the namespace, then the binding will start failing. The conflict, it's expected that the config would be removed from the underlying data plane if the binding changes that it's removed. But like, that's the only way.
How about we spend some more time looking at the security implications, and if everyone is happy with security, because there are also things I mentioned there about attaching policies to the routes and what happens if they're combined and mixed. Basically, if you have some policy, security policy attached to a route, and then you add another route that is delegated, how does it interact, and other things that probably need to be addressed before we
Sure,
fully move
sure.
this.
Yeah, okay, no problem. So I mean, what I would suggest, Austin, is create an issue. Let's talk on an issue about it so that we can do this async. That's not in a long comment chain on this specific document. I think that you're raising really great points that we definitely need to have discussed. We need to have agreement on it. We all need to like have written down that we've discussed about them so that, you know, future us can refer back to them and say, we discussed this and here's what the result was. Sound reasonable? Do you mind opening an issue for that, Costa?
Sure, I'll do that.
Okay, great.
Cool. Well, hey, I think we are past time. Thank you to everyone for staying. Good discussion all around. Thank you to Costin for creating follow-up issue. There are a few different things we can follow up from this meeting and other PRs that still need review. I think, Richard, your gRPC route PR is ready for another round of review. I left some comments, but yes, there are other things. So if you have time, definitely pay attention to GitHub. And with that, I don't want to take any more time. So let's call the meeting as it is. Thank you so much, everyone. And we'll talk to you next week. See you.